Well, world leaders descended on New York this week for the first fully in-person General Assembly since the COVID pandemic. But there are some big names missing, with 4 of the 5 permanent leaders of the Security Council absent.
Rishi Sunak was otherwise engaged, Emmanuel Macron was hosting King Charles, and Vladimir Putin, of course, has an international arrest warrant hanging over his head and so is unlikely to leave Russia. Joe Biden, who of course had the shortest commute, had to go it alone. And it has triggered some analysis and commentary about the usefulness of the gathering in New York. And for more on this, we are joined by Stephanie Fillion, a Canadian reporter and correspondent at the United Nations. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. The world is becoming an increasingly fragmented place. Is the power of this UN gathering waning at all?
Well, the United Nations in itself, as you said, is a reflection of the world. And we're seeing a world right now that's increasingly fragmented. If we look at last year, the United Nations Secretary General warned of a potential great fragmentation coming. And this year, he said, we're seeing symptoms of that, but it's still not too late for that great fragmentation to happen. But that being said, what we really noticed at that UN General Assembly and what many world leaders said in their own speeches was that they're really seeing the world being more fragmented. If I can quote the Prime Minister of Malaysia, for example, he denounced something that he called mini-lateralism. So a lot of countries are prioritizing smaller platforms that may be easier to work with than the United Nations. And we've seen that tendencies with those world leaders not attending. And, when we look at this tendency, you already have smaller countries that maybe have a policy of neutrality, countries that are smaller, that are not necessarily members of these organizations. If we think about the G7, if we think about the G20, or if we also think about the BRICS that expanded recently, these countries feel excluded. So these countries really reminded the world of the importance of the United Nations, where they have a seat where they can meet. And it's also really the only place where every countries meet at the same times, every leader meets at the same times. I don't have the number for this year's General Assembly, but the number of bilaterals, so of leaders who met one another is extremely high, and that's really where the unique place where you can do it here in New York City.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in New York this week. He raised the issue of Russia's veto on the UN Security Council. Those comments were then echoed in more subtle ways by other representatives, including Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong. Do you think that the UN needs to change to keep it relevant? For example, should the veto power on the Security Council be looked at?
Well, the short answer is yes, but it's complicated. Yes, there's, nobody came here in New York City this year and said, the UN is great, let's not change it. I think everybody agrees that the Security Council is dysfunctional. And even though the United General Assembly was able to pass resolution denouncing Russia's actions in Ukraine, we haven't seen really anything happen on the ground or having any result when it comes to that conflict. So really, it goes back to the Security Council that has that kind of power, and Russia is blocking everything. However, most experts will tell you that even though there's an agreement that we need reform, it's very unlikely that permanent 5 members of the Security Council will accept to give up their veto power. So what we're talking about right now is just adding more permanent members to the Security Council. For example, you have a group that wants to add Brazil, Japan, Germany, and India, which arguably will make everything even more complicated and even more dysfunctional. Yeah. So those are different conversations to have.
Just finally, Stephanie, a familiar face appeared in one of the sessions this week. Why was Roger Federer there?
Well, Roger Federer, I think, he's retired, so now he has more time on his hands. So he attended one event on Monday on education for his charity, but you also saw some other celebrities like actress Natalie Portman, for example, to attend the event, because the UN likes to have that kind of star power to get attention to discuss these important issues.
All right, Stephanie Fillion, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, James.